Greetings, everybody. I'm Scott Cooper, and the topic that I'm going to talk about is historic preservation and registering historic buildings on the National Registry. Well, what a great aspect of public history and a way of preserving what we have for future generations. You know, it really encompasses what public history is all about. It's also a great way of promoting discussion about our past. This is something that I've had experience with in the past. 25 years ago, when I was first married, my wife and I purchased a home that was built in the early 1900s. Across the street, the original farmhouse still remained. It was built in the 1880s, and the entire area was registered on the National Register of Historic Places. How about this? What are you looking at behind me? It looks like a gym, right? It's not just any gym. This is Hinkle Fieldhouse, known as Butler Fieldhouse as well. It was built in 1928 and remained the largest basketball arena in the United States all the way through the 1950s. If you've ever watched the movie Hoosiers, and if you haven't, you need to watch that, this is the field house where the championship game was played. It's a prime example of a historic building on the National Registry. Although it's been recently renovated, the building still exhibits all of the original facade. It was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1983. In addition, it was also designated a National Historic Landmark in 1987. So why is preserving historic buildings so important? Think about the places that you visit. Think about the buildings that you've been in. What do you remember about them? What really sticks out in your mind? What is the draw? What is the intrinsic value? What makes that building something to remember? Well, let's look at it this way. Preserving the historic buildings is a step that's crucial in retaining our national heritage. It's crucial in retaining our history and our culture. So think about it this way, if you really want to look at it a different way. Do you recycle? I know I recycle. I don't do a good job at it. But how much trash can you possibly recycle per week? Preserving an old building is not only practical, it's a form of recycling on a large scale. Think about it. You don't need to cut down any new trees for lumber. You don't have to waste energy mining new materials. And in the end, you save the cost of demolition as well as environmental damage that can be caused by filling the landfill with old construction material. You also get a pretty cool place that people will appreciate for its history and beauty while still being useful. Back in the 1980s, Indianapolis went through a period where they were rebuilding the downtown area, and it started off with destroying some old buildings, and they quickly realized that that was not the direction to revitalize a historic district. So let's take a walk through downtown Indianapolis as some examples. Look at downtown Indianapolis right now. What do you notice from this picture? Do you see the high rise in the background or the church? Yeah, my eyes are drawn to the church too. This is the Christ Church Cathedral, built in 1857 in the heart of downtown Indianapolis, adjacent to Monument Circle. It's also the church that Eli Lilly attended regularly. When you tear down an old building, it means that you'll never know what you're losing because you can't build it again. If you travel to the northeast, just out of downtown Indianapolis on foot, you'll come across Massachusetts Avenue. This revitalized district of Indianapolis was once completely considered for destruction, but somebody gave it a second life. All the older buildings were renovated, and the result is pretty amazing. One of the things they realized is that new businesses love old buildings. In addition, the attraction of the old style buildings drew people to the area, and today Massachusetts Avenue is one of the places to go if you're hanging out in Indianapolis. It is full of restaurants and shops, and recently they are renovating the old Coca-Cola plant and making it into condos, which is pretty cool stuff, right? If you travel a short distance to the west of downtown, you enter Lockerbie Square, the oldest intact neighborhood in Indianapolis and once home of James Whitcomb Riley. I have a tie to this area. When I was an undergraduate at Indiana University, they were doing archaeological digs at Lockerbie, and there was a parking lot there. And when they dug up the asphalt and looked at the plat maps, they realized there was a building that was destroyed in the 1950s, a house. And doing archaeology there in the basement, which at the time in the 1950s, you would just plow the house into the basement and then cover it with dirt. What they discovered in the basement was a large pile of milk caps. So why is this important to history? Well, those milk caps were important because they are a direct tie to Indianapolis Amusement Park, Riverside Park, which was built in 1903 and abandoned in 1970. Riverside Park was one of the last remaining segregated areas in Indianapolis, but once a year they would have Milk Cap Day. And that one day a year, African American children were permitted to enter the park with a pile of milk caps. And so in the basement of this building in Lockerbie, there was a child who was saving up milk caps so that he could go, or she could go, to the amusement park. See how it all really ties back into history and preserving history. If you go a few blocks north of that, you can visit the business of Madam J. Walker and the basketball court where Oscar Robinson played. So what all these buildings have in common? They're all reminders of our culture, the complexity, and the heritage of a city. Once you tear down a historic building, you destroy the chance of future generations to explore that history firsthand. We're going to travel a little bit south, and this is Irvington. I have a lot of history with Irvington. If you look at this building, this was a building on the National Registry that's been converted into a reception facility. And if you really want to explore history, take the ghost tour of old buildings in Irvington, and you'll see the original house of Marge Oberholzer. And if you're not familiar with that story, you're going to do a Google search and look that up. It's pretty interesting. You're going to hear about the disturbing history of D.C. Stevens. So what is the National Register of Historic Places? It was enacted on October 15, 1966, and it identifies historically significant buildings, sites, districts, objects, structures, and then documents the significance. These listings go a long way in help building a community pride and assist in building the environment of a community. Go to nps.gov. Take a look at your area. You might be surprised by the numerous buildings registered that are not far from you. According to their website, 95,000 properties were listed as of 2019, and that represents 1.8 million contributing resources, including buildings, sites, districts, structures, and objects. Almost every county in the United States has at least one place on the National Registry. I did a quick look at my hometown, and there are several buildings I remember as a kid that are listed there as well. So what are the criteria for adding a building to the Historic Registry? They have to be associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broader patterns of our history, or they could be associated with the lives of persons who are significant in our past. They could embody the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or they could represent the work of a master or the process of high artistic value, or they could represent a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction, or they may have yielded or likely to yield information important to the history, or to prehistory or our history. It's important to point out that there are some exclusions, and I thought this was interesting. The exclusions to properties, for example, cemeteries, birthplaces, graves of historic figures, properties owned by religious institutions or used for religious purposes, moved structures, reconstructed historic buildings, commemorative properties, and properties that have achieved significance only during the last 50 years are generally not qualified for listing on the register, although there are always exceptions, right? You got to think about that. So why list a property? Historic districts can be centers of heritage, tourism, and help spur economic vitality. Such listings, and just for example, just like Massachusetts Avenue, completely changed that area. Just now it's really popular. Everybody wants to visit there. Such listings and the related documentation can serve as educational tools to help communities understand why these properties are important. And the planning that comes into it will help guide future work in their rehabilitation and stewardship. Listed properties are also identified early in the planning process for federally funded and permitted projects, as well in some states involved informal projects. Finally, listing to the National Registry makes applicable property owners for grants like the Land and Community Heritage Investment Program or the Conservation License Plate Program. Pretty cool stuff, right? I do have to say that on restrictions, listing a house on the National Registry alone does not place restrictions on the property owner, nor does it necessarily preserve a property for the future. It's always important to remember that. I talked about a historic landmark, Hinkle Fieldhouse, in the beginning, so let me tell you about some differences between these. When I talk about the National Register of Historic Places, this is where all federally registered historic properties are listed. This includes all districts, structured buildings, etc. The National Historic Districts are entire neighborhoods or areas that can be designated as a National Historic District. The National Historic District is distinct because it's important in American history at the national level. And then you've got to talk about landmarks, which Hinkle Fieldhouse is one of those right behind me. It's the highest level of distinction in the National Historic Registry as a landmark. Landmarks are protected, and they are properties deemed significant to all Americans because of their exceptional values or qualities, and they help illustrate and interpret the heritage of the United States. Well, there you go. Look at the buildings around you, take a walk, get on the register, find all kinds of good information there, and practice public history. Talk to you soon.